is a bunch of CEOs and C-suite from digital health companies across the Nordics. We have investors from the Nordics, EU and USA and beyond. And we have other key stakeholders from the industry. We hope the conversation today will be relevant and interesting for you all, and that you gain some insights on the region, effective collaboration, how to manage the ebb and flow between companies, investors, and customers and partners, and that you have a bit of fun. So without further ado, let's meet this crack panel that we've assembled here today, courtesy of LSX. So panel, as I briefly mentioned to you before we jumped on, I'll be providing you the headlines for you guys, and you can fill us in briefly on top of that if you'd like to add anything. Like, for example, what your spirit animal is. I want to know a little bit about you guys, or something along those lines, something interesting about you, feel free to share that. And on that, to stimulate a bit of interaction, as Josh said, feel free to add some questions along the way, guys, in the audience. But while we're getting introduced to the panel here, feel free to also share your spirit animals. We'll have a bit of fun. I want to know if there's a bunch of lions or unicorns or dung beetles in the audience. And a tip for you companies, there's a bunch of investors in the audience, so don't say your spirit animal is a sloth, okay? So, let's welcome this panel. First up, we'll introduce Dr. Anna-Karin Edstedt Bonamy from Doctrin. She's the CEO there. Welcome, Anna-Karin.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I would have said my spirit animal is a dog, but then I actually took an evidence-based validated test because evidence is very important to us at Doctrin, and I found out it's a wolf.
Wow.
I don't know how to handle that. Would you like me to introduce Doctrin now, or will you introduce the rest of the panel first?
Feel free to introduce Doctrin. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Doctrin helps healthcare providers to radically improve healthcare by providing them with modern tools to be able to conduct remote consultations. We have grown over the past 4 years to be the biggest platform provider in the Nordics, and we are also active in the Czech Republic and expanding into the UK, where we are going live in a couple of weeks. The problems we are solving are both accessibility problems, but also medical quality problems by automating the medical history taking in a qualified way for both primary care purposes, but also specialist care purposes. We are a CE marked medical device, and we sell our solutions to big healthcare providers as a B2B SaaS solution, and big customers that you might know in the Nordics are Capio, Praktikertjänst, and Lideta, just to mention a few of them. We conduct about 2 million consultations per year in our platform, but we do not provide the care ourselves. It's the healthcare providers that staff the service. We only provide the technology and the medical content in the platform. I will stop there and leave to the rest of the panel. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. Welcome aboard. Looking forward to hearing more from you. Okay, next one would be André Sode. He's the CEO of Liva Healthcare. Please join us, André.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me on the panel here as well.
No, you're welcome.
My favorite kindred spirit, perhaps in terms of being an animal, is the honey badger. If you know that one, the honey badger it's actually a nice animal, but it's very resistant, you can say, in many forms and shapes. So it goes for basically anything and really tries to make a living in a really dramatic way. So I guess that's just a funny way of expressing entrepreneurship.
Fantastic.
Liva Healthcare is a Danish-based company. We have companies in England and in Germany now. We've just established a subsidiary there as well. We are handling people, helping people living better lives via our digital chronic disease management programs. So we are very much entangled with behavioral science in order for people to live healthier lives. And we do that via our technology in a very efficient way. And we're delivering into programs across different clinical pathways, but we have especially a really good and strong foothold in England within the different digital diabetes management or obese weight management programs provided by the NHS.
Fantastic.
And lately, now we are running fast towards Germany with DIGA applications as to being publicly reimbursed there as well.
Fantastic. We'll get to the reimbursements in a little while. That's obviously a topic that the audience is probably going to be interested to hear from you guys about. Thanks, André. Next up, we have John Drakenberg Renander. He's the CEO of Alex Therapeutics. And welcome, John.
Yeah, hi, good to be here.
Fantastic.
So,
looking forward to your spirit animal, because I have a feeling what it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about that before, right? You have my spirit animal behind me here, Berta, the cow. Yeah, quickly about me. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Alex Therapeutics. At Alex, we design and develop digital medicines. So it's software as a medical device, fully digital. And what we do is that we do cognitive behavioral therapy without the therapists. So it's fully digital, it's fully standalone, no human interaction, but we do full treatments. Yeah, we often partner with pharma companies. So we do some ourselves, but we also partner with pharma companies to go to market with them and sort of expand together with them out in the world. And we have a product, we have about 100,000 patients all over the globe, focusing on nicotine addiction, also building our products for depression, anxiety, for instance, and many more to come. So
okay.
Super happy.
Reducing nicotine addiction, not developing it.
No, exactly, reducing it. That's the best way.
Fantastic, that's great. All right, last but definitely not least, we have Eric Tedder, who is the country manager for Sweden for Doctor.se. So come aboard, Eric, tell us a bit about you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm very happy to be here. We just had our third child, actually, so I guess my spirit animal is not very important, but what is important at home is Paw Patrol, for all of you who have small kids. So
also
I'm going to say that instead.
Very important.
Briefly about Doctor.se. So we're a health tech company founded in 2016, based here in Sweden. So we're basically two things. We are, number one, we're a healthcare provider within primary care, both providing healthcare through digital and physical channels. And we're also a tech company. So we license our platform to partners around the world. Currently, we exist in 7 different countries. In Sweden, we have roughly 1 million users. And together with our partners internationally, we have around 1.6 million users. And in Sweden, we have roughly 40 to 50,000 consultations digitally per month.
It's impressive.
Thank you.
Well done. You're welcome. Terrific. Well, now we know who the panel are. I don't think we have any spirit animals in there. You guys are very shy in the audience. Feel free to share them and more importantly, questions along the way to our audience. To our panelists. So in line with the theme of today, let's get stuck into some questions and get some insights from these guys right now. So the first sort of chunk that we're going to look at is the digital ecosystem in the Nordics. The overarching question that was posed by LSX was, how has the Nordic region built such an innovative and internationally competitive digital ecosystem? And I suppose one of the main questions or first questions around that would be, what's your thoughts on that, guys? And what's the advantages of this region that might be stimulating that competitiveness above other parts of Europe and the world? So is it the quality and quantity of data that we have here? Is it the high level of digital maturity and adoption of the audience of these companies? Is it cross-border or cross-sector collaboration? Any thoughts around that, guys? Let's start with you as you're on the screen here, Eric.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question, first of all. And I think that, generally innovation is driven by incentives, most often money, to be honest, but also within healthcare. I think that, or especially within healthcare, I think that entrepreneurs are also driven by impact, truly. So firstly, I think since money is a wonderful starting point, I think that in the Nordics and the reimbursement models that we have had, that also allows for scaling up these type of services or products. So that's been sort of a great starting point. Then second, of course, there is access to great people. We have a very good infrastructure in place, and the safety net for allowing entrepreneurs to truly try things and drive innovation. So it's,
What do you mean by the safety net? Just to expand on that for a second.
Absolutely. So I think that if people drive innovation, you need people that sort of dare to take that risk to start something new and to sort of dare to lose a little bit.
Yep. So the rise of entrepreneurship, basically.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's many different factors within these questions. I mean, one is just why innovation overall. I mean, why are we good at innovation? Not only within health tech in the Nordics, but also in many other sectors. I mean, we have had Spotify, for example, and a whole bunch of very impressive companies that have come from a fairly small country or countries.
Absolutely, absolutely. I suppose in line with that, would you have, I suppose, I think it would be interesting to hear from maybe John around this. Do you have any other thoughts around that, John?
Yeah, sure. I think as a company where we're not sort of enjoying the reimbursement system in Sweden yet, since we don't have a physician or a sort of healthcare practitioner who are actually doing the treatment. We don't in Sweden, where we're from, we don't support that yet, but we hopefully will in the future. I think another perspective on this that I hope we will talk more about later is sort of the instant internationalization sort of mentality and DNA that is often grown within companies. And I'm definitely not the first one to talk about this, but we as a company, we sort of from day one thought, okay, the world is our market, not Sweden. And from there, we sort of, we've grown really quickly and been able to take some grounds outside of Sweden and sort of move to markets such as Germany and the US, for instance, and really had that perspective. So I think to have an international mindset from day one is also very characteristics of the Nordic region because we're so small.
That's excellent. We'll hear more about the internationalization and the thoughts around that in a little while. Very interesting. I suppose another question around this would be, is there something that the region can do to strengthen or improve the already positive situation that we have here? Maybe I'll ask maybe André, would you like to have a crack at that question? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, sure. But I firstly also think that obviously the Nordics is for all countries matter is countries that have a really high degree of digital savvy in its communities and with its population. Versus, for example, other European countries. That's why investors are looking forward to jump on ship in some of our small ventures here and trying to conquer the world. We also have a tradition for being more digitally oriented in the healthcare system. For example, in Finland, we have digital patient files, for example. And some of that is driving also the entrepreneurship, I guess, for many companies in order to facilitate better digital and clinical pathways for patients and users in general. So I think there's a lot in the framework of assisting digital healthcare in the Nordics in that sense. Where we definitely can improve, and now I'm particularly talking to a Danish setting because that's our home market, and perhaps a bit into John's about the you can say the public sector referral pathways and the reimbursement structures that are provided for services, digital therapeutic services, as we have in Liva. That is not really allocated well enough, and there are a skewed incentive in the system as how things are set up between what the local authorities are aiming to do and what is centrally provided. And what we see in Europe, especially in Germany and in England, is that these digital therapeutic solutions are prescribed from a central point of view in centrally organized deals that you can go for in bid and tenders and things like that. And then you have a really good access to the market in one go instead of going from small local authorities as we have to do in Denmark, for example, in our home market. That is something that would be wonderful to have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we'll move to investment in a second, but I think just to touch on that point, the initiatives that they're coming up with for cross-border collaboration with Nordic Smart Government and Nordic Council of Ministers, aiming to have a sort of a more collaborative situation between the Nordic countries. I think it's moving in the right direction. Just might want to get there a little bit quicker, maybe. But you're doing a great job, ministers. So keep doing what you're doing. Okay, so let's transition. That's a good segue into the investment side of things. The next sort of chunk, and I think it would be quite interesting for the excuse me, audience that we have here, a mixture of companies and investors and partners and ecosystem stakeholders. What are the investment trends? Excuse me. What are the investment trends around health tech? And obviously, COVID-19 has stimulated enormous growth within the last 18 months or longer, with record-breaking amounts of money being put into investment in general, but also into health, record amounts of innovation being stirred amongst the industry. Will that capital keep going, and will it keep flowing is the question. So is it just a fad that we're seeing from you guys' thoughts? Is it something that's in line with COVID-19? And if COVID eases, is the capital going to ease as well? Or is this something that's here to stay in line with the innovation that's being delivered within the healthcare system or ecosystem? Maybe Anna-Karin, we haven't heard from you. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Thank you. Yes, I do think the change is here to stay, and I think the capital will keep flowing. I'm not an investor myself, but if I were, I would look a lot into sustainability of the business models that investors invest in. I mean, coming back to the reimbursement models, because I think that in the Nordics, and especially in Sweden perhaps, the reimbursement models and everything has paved the way for a change in society, and paved the way for us that provide technology to healthcare providers that are publicly financed. But if this is going to be allowed to continue, I would, as an investor, look into how might regulations change and radically change the value of my investment. Because what we've seen over the past years, I would say, is that lots of money have been put into the telemedicine players that have been able to benefit from the traditional reimbursement models. And I think that has been positive for the sector as a whole, but I can also foresee that those regulations and reimbursement models might change in the future. So that is where I would look if I were an investor.
And that can go either way. That can be increase in value or decrease depending on what the regulation says. So that's a really good point.
But I think sustainability is the key word here, like to look for sustainable business models in the investments.
It's a good point. Make sure the dogs are eating the dog food, and it's not just a whole bunch of family and friends, I suppose. But absolutely, and the robustness of those business models to weather the storm of those different regulations, if possible, as well, I think is a really good point. So I'm going to write that down as a key takeaway, which we'll summarize later. Following on from this, or in line with this, Eric, you're on my screen again. So do you see your experience, is money coming from local investors, or is it more international investors looking at the space or at the region as well?
I think both. Also coming back to, John's point, I think that many players here from the Nordics, we have the mindset already from an early start that we are global companies, and we reach out proactively as well. We look at new markets, we get in contact with new investors and so forth as well. And also to comment just on Anna-Karin's point on regulatory risk and the importance of looking at that, which I completely agree with. But there's also something, regulatory sort of reality today. You need to look at companies that already today have, a way of making money, kind of. We have the reimbursement models within healthcare are highly complex, and the public payers, of course, they sort of set the tone. But I think that, many companies have excellent ideas, genius, and the impact they can provide is just very, I mean, significant. But still, you have to sort of keep in mind, I mean, how are we going to make money out of this? So that's sort of looking at specific companies. But then the question also, I mean, around, is the health tech sector as a whole attractive or not? And I would definitely invest in the sector. Looking at it's already like 10-15% of global GDP. It's growing faster than GDP. And on top of that, you will also see, I think, a shift from public to private. So you have this huge sector just growing fairly quickly, and there's also significant room for improvement.
Absolutely. You got a significant investment from Tencent. Was that is that a region that you expected investment from? Is that did you proactively look for investment in that region strategically, or was it just did it just they love you and came to you?
No, that's right. So we just closed our D round here this summer, and Tencent was one of the investors, so one of our new owners. I guess you would look at Tencent as sort of a global company. So yes, we are looking at sort of the global market, but also specifically, I guess you're after looking for China. So and absolutely, and that's also a market we're looking for, especially for our platform business. Once again, we're two things. We're both a healthcare provider, and we're also a tech company.
That's a really good point. Just on this topic, I just want to hear from you, André, as well. You got a fair bit of investment from Germany, I understand. Do you feel that I'm not sure exactly when that's sort of been allocated to you, but do you feel that the scrutiny and the time of investments has decreased or increased during COVID-19? Obviously, have more money floating around, but there's also the remote aspect of investing. So that's obviously bringing challenges. What are you feeling about this? Is it faster or slower?
I definitely have experienced it to be much faster. I mean, the outreach from institutional investors and venture funds, etc., have picked up as well. I think especially the COVID-19 situation clearly has changed the focus into our space, and you could also say it's a bit of hype, as I experienced it as well. That it is about finding those companies where you really can accelerate the growth and the traction. So you really have some investors going for that. Also, investors that have, now I'm talking for our own space with digital therapeutics, where that has existed for a while longer in the US. So you have some of these US players that have made a lot of money on exiting some of the US investments, and then they are looking towards Europe to finding a similar play where they can utilize that experience they have had in the US and trying to implement that strategy into a European setting as well. So that's the tendency that we experience in Liva currently. But that being said, there are also a lot of European investors that are very keen into digital health in general, and I'm really sure that the COVID-19 situation is the leading indicator for that.
That's that's very insightful. It's a good point. And sorry, just to remind you guys, don't forget to ask some questions in the chat. It's there for you guys to use. Feel free to put some in there, and we'll get to them. We've got a whole bunch here that we have already, but feel free if there's something interesting that you want the panel to cover, please let us know. On that point, in terms of leveraging your international investors, there's an interesting sort of topic here that I'd like to touch on, which is investors obviously have to find the best way of challenging companies, supporting them in various ways. And at the same time, companies need to leverage those relationships with investors to make sure that they have that symbiotic partnership where the investors are opening up their networks and the companies are asking the right questions to the investors to make sure that they know how to help them best. Maybe Anna-Karin, do you have any thoughts around the best way to utilize your investor base to get the best impact or the most impact? Or is any of the other panel, feel free to jump in.
I could just say that we have benefited enormously from having one of the large healthcare providers in Sweden as owner from the start. And they are not only a Swedish healthcare provider, but also owned by an international healthcare provider, Ramsay Santé, in France or Australia, if you take the bigger group. And their investor I'm talking about is Capio. And of course, their healthcare knowledge and network and their understanding of the problems we are trying to solve has helped us enormously. So I think it's very good to have investors with expertise, of course, in the area where you're working.
So just to boil that down quickly, for advice for companies is it's not just take money where you can get it. It's try, if you can, if you have the option, to get a strategic investor that can actually impact your business in a positive way on a more sort of, if you have and a lot of companies that are born global now or have that global mindset, on a bigger impact abroad from where you're actually located.
And we've also had HealthCap all along the way, and they are also very well connected in the life science field, although a bit further from healthcare.
So secure amazing anchor investors. That's the tip. Okay, I think
that's on every. That also, Jeremy, if you don't mind, just to I think as a startup or as a young company, the world's a big place. So I think owner by association in any way possible, I think is just absolutely detrimental to the success of the company. If you can, when they don't know you, if they know someone that are associated with you, then you have a sort of a foot in the door. And if that's a partner, I mean, for instance, we work with Pfizer, that's like a super big door opener for us. If it's an investor, I think any possible way you can use that is just great.
I think that's a really crucial point, and building that credibility now during COVID-19, where there's more international or remote investment opportunities, there's got to be a way for companies to build trust. So, and build it quicker. You can't look people in the eyes and you can't shake hands like you could previously, or not at the moment anyway. So there's a positive that these companies or these investors are looking at the region and making global investments and not even having to go to those places. So it opens up their portfolio opportunities, opens up the investment opportunities for companies in different regions. But there's also the element of building trust. And if you can align with and leverage the credibility or association by honor by association, which is really well put, John, then that's obviously a crucial thing for companies to think about, and investors, obviously, because that's something they bring to the table that is more powerful now than ever before. So can you do that with partners as well? Is it as strong if you have a partner like that as opposed to a partner investor, or is it or do you think that there's more impact from an investor sort of honor by association?
If that question was directed to me, I'll have a go quickly. So investors, I think, are awesome because they give that security. I talked earlier today about the risk versus opportunity. Many big companies and many partners and many collaborators in our field, they are thinking a lot about risk. And one obvious risk is for at least smaller companies that they go bankrupt, right? That's just the way it is. So just to say that you have a strong owner and a strong investor that will sort of has your back as a just a start is an amazing start. But when it comes to leveraging new partnerships and new customers, I think other customers are a better way, right? If you can talk about how you're already working with a really strong industry leader, I mean that's probably a better way of getting honor by association, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point as well.
Yeah, can I answer that as well, just Jeremy? I
also absolutely not. Eric, heard enough from you? Of course, please tell us.
No, of course, I would like to praise our own owners as well. And I think, as owners or investors, I think you could really provide quite a lot to the company, of course. I mean, money, expertise, network. Looking at what has been truly, valuable for us is that, when you go from local to global, moving to new markets, you will find yourself in deep waters. And the people dimension has been just crucial. Finding that first person in a new country to work with, for example. If we have an owner who already sort of knows the market, knows the country, that has been truly crucial.
Absolutely.
It could also be both a coworker, coming coworker. It could be a new client or just a new partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that element of challenging you or directing you in the right way that I think is a really important point for investors to sort of take on board. It's not just about being supportive. Obviously, they scrutinize what you do, but a lot of them feel that they just need to be supportive. And but I think there's an element of challenging as well in a positive way.
Absolutely.
With you, Andre, you've had experience with this previously, or the company with NetDoctor, and have you felt that the investors you've got on board what's the most interesting way that they've challenged you in order to move in the right direction? Is there anything that you can share with us that there's been sort of a little bit outside the box in terms of the way that they've pushed you or made you rethink something you thought you knew?
Yeah, I think generally in Liva, we are entrepreneurial and fast-paced and fast decision-making, very passionate about what we do. And sometimes it's really good to have a sounding board as well that actually asks you some of the critical questions in have you thought this really through? And where are the calculations that really support this and things like that. So you have some really strong strategists around you in the boardroom that can help you fine-tune your thinking and put it into the right, you can say, context for execution as well. But I also think that when you are going through the different phases of getting investors on board on the journey of the company, it is also good to look for those investors that add the competences that you are in need of at the current stage that you are in. And that might be different things. So in the beginning, it's much about how to structure things, how to get the product market fit ready, go to market strategies and things like that. And perhaps later on, it is very much about marketing all of a sudden and how to increase your voice in the market and become a bigger brand and things like that. Or it is how to adapt into certain different clinical pathways. So you really find investors that are specialized in those different challenges that you are pursuing at that point in time when you're raising money as well.
That's a really good point. So different investors for different periods of your growth and the path that you have. Just quickly, a lot of companies will, and it's not a quick question. I mean, it's a quick question, not a quick answer. How do you find these investors? So companies like you are probably in a different bracket, but earlier on in your life cycles, it was probably a little bit more of a struggle when you're just building your credibility. This is for the whole panel. Feel free to jump in here. Any tips, tricks for companies to find investors, the right investors?
If I can just briefly add my experience or how we are pursuing it in Liva, that is basically to look at it as a sales process as well. So I am keeping a CRM system for potential investors, map out the market, who are the partners, who are the analysts, what are they looking for, who are they invested in, and then setting up talks, setting aside every week a few hours of investor relations, working the floor, you could say, in terms of having dialogues and finding out where the right fit is. And when you're ready for your next round and you have your next plan ready for execution, then you start your outreach, and then you already are in dialogue. So I think it's an ongoing job that you have in any startup to really work the floor and find out who is the right investor for you.
It's a great advice, and I give the same thing to a number of companies that I work with. Is just build those relationships early and regularly, because it's about building that trust and relationship, showing the investors that you can actually execute, putting your hand up and say, this is what we're going to do. And after time, getting back to that investor and saying, you know how I told you I was going to do that, I did it. And now next time we're going to do this. And then going back to them leading up to an investment round. But it's still difficult to find them, I think, for a lot of companies. If you're in the club and you're an investment opportunity that investors are looking for, then they come to you and they find you. If you're not in the club yet, if you're not a successful entrepreneur, you're not associated, or you don't have that honor by association yet, then you're still, the bouncer could reject you at the door a lot of the time. So it's a bit tricky. Sure. Any other thoughts from the other panelists on how best to attract or find or source those investors, those strategic investors that you actually want on the cap table?
I would like to share some perhaps softer but extremely important things, and I think it's about values in the company, and the purpose is very important, not only for attracting the right employees but also for attracting the right investors. Because I think that if you don't have a very clearly articulated purpose with your company, and you work on that a lot in the beginning, I think it will be much harder to attract the right investors, if any investors at all. It might be obvious, but I think that more companies could spend more time on the purpose.
I agree with that. Also, just a very concrete tip is that, especially when it comes to the Nordic region, every investor knows every investor. I mean, they all know each other. So everyone who's investing in the Nordic region, they know each other. Meet often, talk about deals, talk about what's next. So if you get to know one and get to know them well and become friends with them, they will introduce you to any investor. If they believe in you, they will introduce you to any investor that you want in the Nordic region. And mostly that also kind of extends often to Europe and the world as well, but especially in the Nordic parts.
There's two great tips I see there. It's make connections with people, even though they might not be immediately helpful to you, because they might know someone who does, or who is helpful down the line. And the other tip is don't piss anyone off, because it's going to go around very quickly, and you'll be black marked. So that's good advice for you companies in the audience who are looking to raise. Any other thoughts, guys, on that?
I mean, sort of like what we've touched upon already, but of course the type of advice will vary depending on, I mean, what phase are you in as a company? Are you still sort of like a local unknown company? Then you have to just have to be out there and talk to everyone, talk to investors and so forth. Once you scale up and more sort of like a renowned company, also looking at a global scene for global investors who are not sort of around the corner here in Stockholm, that will be a different path, of course, a different journey.
That's a good point. One last thing before we move on, guys, and this is an interesting one, maybe one or two words, literally, if you can manage to do it, on the key thing for investors to focus on to be strong partners. So what are the putting the hat on the other, or the shoe on the other foot, looking at investors from a company perspective. If I'm a company and I've got an investor that comes on board, what's the thing that I want most for that investor to focus on or concentrate on to help me? How can they be the best partners for us as companies? You're on my screen, Eric, so you're up.
I mean, for investors, for us, it will be introducing us to the right people.
Yep. That's crucial, absolutely crucial. And it's that honor by association that we spoke about earlier. If we can get a couple of words, if there's anything different from the other panelists as well, just about what investors, how they can be the best partners they can be. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very important balance between how much you should, distract, for lack of better words, your entrepreneurs, your founders and the CEO. I think it's a great balance of being there if the entrepreneurs and the CEOs want support and want help. But if not, I think it's also really great to give them space. I've been super fortunate so far that all our investors are very supportive, and they have a high trust for me and the management team so far. But I've also I've also heard many stories from other friends in the startup community who are just right out hating their investors because they're taking way too much time from them. So I think without having that experience myself, I think that's a good thing to consider.
Yeah, good point. Anna-Karin, do you have any thoughts around that? Now, you have to be delicate here, guys. You don't want to upset your investors, but just some mild tips for other investors, because all your investors are perfect. These are for other investors.
Yeah, but I would say that, I mean, regardless of how much time you spend with your investors, which may be too little or too much, I would say that when you spend time with your investors, I really appreciate when they share mistakes others have made that you could potentially avoid by knowing about those mistakes, but also like best practices in the industry, innovative business models that others have tried in other sectors, but that could perhaps work in healthcare as well. So those are the things where I feel that investors see so many good and bad examples of others that are very difficult as an entrepreneur to get insights into, and where you can really learn, I think, from your investors.
I think a lot of investors actually use that as a bargaining chip to say that we've done this before. We know the mistakes you could potentially make. So therefore your valuation is going down a little bit because we're going to bring this to the table. But,
but I think it might be true, actually.
Potentially, yeah. But that's the art of the dance of the investor negotiation, I suppose. André, do you have any thoughts around that?
Very quickly, I think the relationship needs to be talked about and be prior to actually investing, right? So you really, as an investor, I would encourage everyone to really figure out how to work together, because you have to kind of iron out those expectations for each other. Especially for the point that John made, that if you sit on the lap all the time and of the entrepreneurs and they want the reporting and numbers and slides and things like that and review, then that's probably not the best way of doing it if that's not inherited in the shared vision for the company. So I think to manage the expectations on a cultural level, on the way of working, that is very important to
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Establish the relationship early on.
Yeah.
Terrific.
And just a final note on that, because every investor is saying we have a team for you, we will be there for you, and blah 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 blah. And that's also for the entrepreneurs to really be picky about, is to really lift the lid on that talk and really find out how does that actually look like.
Yep, absolutely. That's a really good point. So, okay, thank you for your thoughts, guys. We're going to move on to the next chunk, which is expansion, or steps to expansion and growth. So the overarching theme was what are the next steps for the region in terms of leading health tech businesses and expanding within the region and internationally from there. So first sort of fairly broad question is there a typical path that is more traveled or well traveled by health tech companies in this region when looking at internationalization and growth? And should the path be Nordic first? Should we start here, or should companies start here and then look abroad and use this as a test bed? Or should they just immediately skip to another region, or which is better for them or more profitable potentially? Eric, you want to have a crack first?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to. I'm picking on you because you're the first person I see on my screen, so I'm picking on you.
I love it.
Okay.
Cool. I'm actually again going to come back to John's previous point about Nordic companies sort of have that global mindset, because that's really what's key here. I mean, if you know that you are, happy locally and you never want to go abroad, of course, then you should just, that's a completely different story from rather than having sort of that path to global domination. That said, I think that, so it's two different things. I mean, where should you start? What is the first stepping stone, sort of like step one? And then when you go abroad, how should you do that? And I think that the Nordic is sort of like a very good, if you call it sort of test bed or everything. This is a great place to sort of test your concept and test your model, whether it's sort of more tech heavy or if it's a caregiver model as well. We sort of have both, but we think that Sweden has been a just great starting point.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts around that? Is there a path that you've sort of taken that you would recommend to others?
I would like to connect back to what we talked about in the beginning, like how the Nordics has been so successful and we started quite early in the health tech field. I mean, one challenge when expanding abroad is that most markets are still extremely immature. And that is also one reason why you have to stay in the Nordics for a while. I mean, to scale your business first in the Nordics and then go to other markets. I mean, there are more mature markets, but that might be in the US and the UK, but many other, if you look at the European, but also global markets, are extremely immature in this field. And to not spend too much money building the market, you need to like really have a good concept that you develop at home, and also show the evidence for your concept by using Nordic data is something that I think is very important also for sales and marketing when you go to a new market as a foreign player, that you have been able to show that in Sweden this worked really well and we were able to save this much money for that healthcare provider. I think that is a strong reason to stay in the Nordic region for a while before scaling abroad. And when you go to the first market or first markets, for us it has been very helpful to do that together with healthcare partners, to like overcome that lack of understanding that you will always have. I mean, I worked for 20 years as a medical doctor in healthcare in Sweden and in France for a little while, but still when I go to a new market, I mean, healthcare is quite local, although the problems are global. So you need a good partner, I would say, even if you have a strong footprint from the Nordics.
Okay, that's a good advice. I think using the Nordics as a proving ground and then leveraging that into other regions. Okay, what are the major challenges being faced for companies that are growing, expanding in this sector, or both this sector and this region? So a couple of points here I've got that might be challenging are growing the team, figuring out the reimbursement systems in the target markets, sustainable business model, as you mentioned earlier, Anna-Karin, the regulatory pathway. What do you guys think is the main sort of challenge? I think, André, you're probably going to say the regulatory from previous chats with you, maybe. But is there? We haven't heard from you for a little while, John. You want to chime in and give us your thoughts on what the major challenge is for companies growing from the sector out?
Absolutely, and I can just also start with a comment from the last question, is that I totally agree with Anna-Karin, and I think we should use the Nordic region to start off and experiment. It's our home market. Also a little bit connecting back to honor by association, the Nordic region has a super awesome brand when it comes to healthcare and welfare all across the globe. So utilizing that, being a proud Nordic company, I think that's great, and that you can show data on that as well. And when talking about where to turn next, I think for me it's and for us at Alex, it's very important to follow the money. I think it's pretty blunt way of putting it, but going back to like ultimately you have to earn money, and you have to have a sustainable business model, as Anna-Karin mentioned before. So really looking at which market can enable that, and sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not very obvious. And I also agree with Anna-Karin when it comes to doing it with partners. I think that's usually the absolute best way of going abroad.
So so that's so use Nordics as a proving ground, and then really consider the money or where the biggest market is, and follow that as the next stepping stone.
But what I've also seen other entrepreneurs, other companies, once they moved to a bigger market, once they properly like shifted from the Nordic region to a large European market or to the US, usually what they say is we should have gone earlier. They usually, that's at least my impression, that they stayed too long in such a small market and focus too much, and it's always the next thing, and everything takes more time. If you think you're going to kick off and start up in a Nordic country in a year or 2 years, that could easily turn into 3 to 5 years, and then time has passed and the market has moved, market has changed. So don't stick around too long. Get out there. That's mine.
It sounds like good advice. Don't wait. You can't move fast and break things, because we're in the health sector. So we've got to move fast and carefully, not break people, but move as fast as we can safely. I suppose that's the mantra, not the Silicon Valley model, but maybe the Nordic model. Excellent. We want to touch on the regulatory, André. You had some thoughts about this, I think.
Yeah, of course. And I think we all do think a lot about the regulatory environment and with the different regimes coming out of the European Union. But it's also an advantage for us, right? Because it's entry barriers for anyone else to join the party. And if you nail it efficiently, and then you also have access to a lot of patients out there and a lot of markets as a bus ticket, you could say, that it just needs to be there and needs to be maintained. Otherwise, you don't have a green light to pursue the things that you would like to. I also agree on the Nordics as a really good testing ground. We have a lot of scientists and universities and science institutions that are, looking for chiming in on different scientific projects. You can also get grants for that. So you can get some really strong evidence and outcomes to present when you're moving outside of the Nordic area with really credible universities and scientists behind it as well, and you can publish articles on the back of that. And all of that evidence is also a bus ticket, in my opinion, in order to move outside of your local market. But for a company in operating from Denmark in Copenhagen, the Danish market is very, very small, right? So as soon as you have that evidence, you need to move out quickly into some of the bigger markets and try your way and fight your way in there. And that has been our approach, really going for the UK market as one of the biggest ones in Europe, and so far it's been a good decision to take that journey. But it is also a struggle because you really need to understand a completely new level of operating versus how things are being done in a Danish setting, for example.
Yeah, it sounds like a bit of a challenge, but it's sort of follow the money, but also weigh it up with the difficulty of managing that regulatory minefield, I suppose.
But it's fun.
I'm sure it is. I'm glad you're enjoying your time and your life. I'm glad you're smiling there, André.
Sorry, quick comment on that as well, Germany.
Go for it.
Just to follow on what Anna-Karin said earlier with, markets and countries being pretty localized when it comes to healthcare. And unfortunately, from our experience, we've also seen that when it comes to clinical evidence. So, in Germany, you prefer data from German patients. In the US, you prefer clinical data from, Americans, etc., etc. And I think it makes sense to gather evidence as much as you can, but also don't rely on too much on that. You can use your papers and your data and your publications worldwide. That's just
I couldn't agree more, actually, and I'm so relieved that you are all telling me also that we are not moving into the UK too early, but we are going live with our first big customer in the UK next week. And we actually, so thank you very, very much, John, because we decided very early on to spend the first 6 months gathering UK data to reproduce the results we have from Swedish primary care in the UK, because we also realized that although we might have gotten quite a few leads via our really good Swedish data, we will need UK data quite immediately to become successful. So thank you.
That's a great point. So don't just worry about the local market. Obviously, investors in different and partners in different regions, and your customers are probably going to want local proof as well. I think that also is quite common in the Nordics. They like local stuff and they like local proof. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Any go-to programs? Is it just sort of brute force or sheer will moving into these new markets, or are there programs that you've leveraged off that you would recommend to other investors and companies to look at or investors for the portfolio companies for themselves? such as Nordic Amplify, or which is US entry support program, or anything like that? Any market entry programs you recommend? Or you just get it done? It's for the whole panel. Anyone jump in if there's anything good that you'd like to share. There's no
I have
program.
no experience with market entry programs, but all days of the week I would prefer to go with the partner, but I might be wrong because I don't have any experience.
Okay, well, if there's any
yeah, I agree.
Nordic ministers watching,
just get it
set up
done.
better programs or promote them better. Anyway, so it's just about finding strategic partners and leveraging those relationships from there is probably the best way to go.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Key do's and don'ts for expansion and growth. A couple of words from each one of you, and then we'll wrap it up.
I would say don't try to do it slowly. I don't think slow is the way to success. We've seen in Sweden that the only way to become successful is to actually make quite radical and big movements, because slow you will only suffocate and then die. So once you're ready, you have to scale up quickly in all markets, I would say.
Okay, scale quickly. Fantastic. Writing that down. Don't die. Did you hear that, companies? Don't die and suffocate. That's the best advice I've heard today. Fantastic. If there's nothing else crucial, guys, I think we'll wrap it up for today. We've got a couple of minutes left. I don't want to leave Josh too little time to transition to the next exciting event or panel or whatever's coming up next. So I think we've covered quite a bit today. Hopefully it was interesting for you guys. I think some of the takeaways are use the Nordics as a playground or as a proving ground. Follow the money from there. Get data in different regions. So don't just worry about home data. Expand quickly, as Anna-Karin just said, as fast as you can within reason, and get that data and prove yourselves in other regions sooner than later. And attract quality partners that you can leverage off. From an investor perspective, it's build ongoing, so from a company's thinking about investment, it's build ongoing relationships, have a clear purpose so that you can articulate that to your investor base, leverage local relationships, don't upset anyone because it's going to get around, you're blacklisted, and don't die. I think that was the don't suffocate is the other one. So hopefully that was interesting for you guys and from the different perspectives. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you to the panelists and to LSX for putting on such a great event over this whole Congress. And for inviting me to moderate. We hope the conversation increased your understanding of the region and the companies within it. And please reach out to LSX, myself, or these amazing CEOs and companies to discuss any of these topics further and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much to the panel. I'm not sure if I said that, but
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, thank you to a fantastic panel. I think lots of great summary there as well, Jeremy, of all things discussed, lots of great insight. I think that lots of people should be listening to and taking advice from. So yeah, my thanks to André, to Anna-Karin, to John, to Eric, and for Jeremy for guiding us through the discussion. Just 1 minute now to our next session, which is a sort of medtech focused session on the synergies between US and European market approvals. But for now, thanks again to the panel. Pleased to keep the conversation going and look forward to seeing you on the next session.